This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Aoife White, Politico's Technology and Competition Editor. We're very happy to see so many of you in person this year. The pandemic brought us hybrid working and a boom in online services, but we miss the coffee, the cookies, and seeing you all. The last year has been an intense one for tech and for tech policy in Europe. Artificial intelligence has taken off like a rocket, with AI art winning prizes, ChatGPT doing kids' homework. European Union policymakers wanted to be ahead of the curve on tech, and the last year has shown how hard that is. We've got a draft AI Act, but is it fit for purpose? We've got a Digital Services Act and a new acronym, VLOPs, or Very Large Online Platforms, but can we be sure it's got muscle? We've got a Digital Markets Act, and of this week, a UK digital competition bill, but have they got teeth to really make a difference in opening up digital ecosystems? We have a very new Chips Act, but will it drive the industry that we want? And we may soon have a Data Act, but data questions are only spiralling. Data transfers across the Atlantic are still an open question. CSAM asks us how far do enforcers need to go to really crack down on illegal content that can so easily spring up again. Today and tomorrow, we'll be speaking to the people who think deeply on these issues, and many of the people who will be making the decisions in coming months that will determine EU tech policy for the years ahead. We hope that the debates ahead will give you some answers and spark plenty of questions, too, on what should be the next frontier for EU policy. I'd like to thank our partners for making this summit possible, presenting partner Google, networking partner Vodafone. And before we kick off, a few housekeeping rules. You can ask questions through the SwapCord platform. If you're in the room, you can scan the QR code on the screens. Otherwise, check instructions you find on our event website. If you're already on the platform, feel free to chat with fellow attendees and ask questions in the question box to the right of the screen, if you're on a desktop, and below the live stream if you're viewing on your mobile. For some sessions, our moderators will tell you of the chance to ask questions in person. Now, we like debate, so please talk about us on Twitter or the social media of your choice. We even have a hashtag. It's the hashtag Politico Tech Europe. And now we'll start our first panel. I leave you in the capable hands of our ace AI reporter, Jan Volpicelli, who'll be talking about Europe's quest to regulate artificial intelligence. Over to Jan.
Thank you, Aoife. Hello, everyone. I'm Jan Volpicelli. I'm the ace reporter. I'm a technology reporter at Politico. I'm very happy to be here with you today. The title of this session is Taking Stock of Europe's Quest to Regulate Artificial Intelligence. And boy, there is a lot of stock to be taken when it comes to artificial intelligence. Of course, the AI Act is still being debated in Parliament as we speak. Today, actually, there are some pretty crucial negotiations. The AI Liability Directive is waiting in the wings. And of course, the industry itself has changed a lot over the past few months with the rise of ChatGPT and its little cousins. So I think we can essentially talk about it a lot. Welcome. There will be some 10 minutes allocated to questions, Q&A directly here. So this is just the main housekeeping rule. And now I think I can welcome our two panelists in person here. And we see two panelists there. Please welcome Andrew Strait, Director of Emerging Technology at the Ada Lovelace Institute, Lucilla Scioli, hello, Director for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Industry at DG Connect, European Commission. And joining us remotely and meets needs is Carmela Tigas, the Secretary of State for Artificial Intelligence in Spain. Are you in Madrid? How's it going?
Yes. Glad to meet you. I'm sorry not being able to join you in person.
Well, thank you for being here nonetheless. Well, okay, let's kick it off. Let's take the stock I probably start by asking someone from a British organization what they think about the EU's quest to regulate AI. Andrew, you're not British, but you work for the Brits at the Lovelace Institute. Can you essentially set the stage for us? What's going on in terms of AI regulation in Europe, and what's your judgment so far? What's your verdict?
Yes, well, I should say we do have an office in Brussels. We are not just a British organization, but a fair point, a fair challenge. It's a very exciting time with AI regulation worldwide. I think this is a moment we've been building to for some time. We're finally getting to a point of asking the hard questions of how we regulate a very fast-paced emerging technology. And Europe has an incredible first-mover advantage. Already, we're seeing Brussels effects shaping how conversations around regulation are playing out in the UK, in the United States, in Brazil, all over the world. It's an incredibly challenging task to regulate a technology that sits across so many different sectors. And the risk-based approach the EU has taken is what we think a very promising approach, one that tries to address many of the challenges that arise with these systems. They rely on complex supply chains, which makes identifying responsibilities within that supply chain quite difficult. They oftentimes can span all kinds of high-risk sectors like education or employment, which makes identifying ways in which you can regulate the systems at their core, at their base, very challenging, considering there are many innocuous uses of these systems. So what we think the EU has done is fantastic. It's a really good starting point for a regulation of this emerging fast-paced technology. We think there's some excellent additions made to the draft since it was first released, including adding notions around affected persons or people who are affected by these technologies into the draft, around thinking about the role of standards and the role of a robust central office who can take on all kinds of responsibilities around monitoring these developments and updating guidance. There's many parts of the draft that I think still need to be revisited.
Some of the bad stuff now, Andrew?
Yes, fair enough. I think a few things that we would still like to see. So one is coming up with a very robust, clear central office, which is going to have this very challenging task of updating guidance, updating the law over the years to come. You're not going to get this right on the first go. Industry will adapt to these regulations in ways that may require additional follow-up, and having a robust office that is capable of monitoring and assessing those changes in dynamics will be necessary.
So it's not just a commission, a job for the commission. You want something separate. The enforcement should be done by the AI office.
We want something strong and centralized. Yes, I think that's a really necessary component of this bill. Another aspect is also coming up with very clear criteria for how we define high-risk systems and some of the other risk-based categories in the bill. At the moment, that process is still not very clear. We'd recommend some kind of criteria for how what classifies something as high risk, and crucially, that criteria must account for systemic risk, things like environmental damages, economic damages, widespread misinformation, all these kinds of really challenging risks that are very difficult to identify, but are crucial for the success of these technologies and the safety of EU citizens.
Okay, ChatGPT.
I did not write any of this speech for ChatGPT. I swear to God.
Is this fantastic architecture you just described ready to grapple with the rise of advanced AI such as ChatGPT?
Great question. So not yet, in our opinion, but we're getting close. We're really excited by some of the proposals that are going into the trilogues around how to regulate general-purpose AI systems as a sort of separate category, which is applying many of the aspects of the high-risk classification to these kinds of technologies. These are different. They are a example of the ways in which AI as a field is constantly changing and coming up with all types of very novel, difficult to regulate applications. And what makes these types of technologies unique is that they have general capabilities. It's a single model is capable of a wide variety of uses, of applications, of being fine-tuned in specific ways. That needs to be treated as a sort of separate, distinct thing, in our opinion.
Okay, let's see what the Commission thinks. Lucilla, I would like to kind of prod you on 2 points here. The first one is enforcement. From what I understand, the Commission is not a big fan of the idea of a strong AI office or board. I heard Commissioner Vestager saying that it would be a bit too costly and possibly a further layer of complexity on the enforcement. So I'd like to hear what you think about it. And also, maybe I wonder whether the rise of these new kind of AI models, such as ChatGPT, BARD, and whatnot, change your evaluation of what's the best way to regulate this. I was still wedded to a risk-based approach, or should we kind of revise our priors?
So thank you for the question, and good morning, everybody. So let me start with the office. What the Commission has proposed is a strong artificial intelligence board.
Yeah.
So this is not an independent office. It would be a board composed by the Commission, a member states representative, and then, of course, you would always also involve, for example, the data protection supervisor. Also, the presence of the European Parliament is possible. And this board would also be helped by a group of experts, which would be available because a lot of these artificial intelligence questions, as you see, are fairly technical. So
people like Andrew, for instance.
Probably. I don't know Andrew, I don't know his background,
He
but
looks
I'm
very
thinking,
expert.
right, okay. But certainly also, professors, academics, people from industry, but people also from civil society organizations, of course. And this would be essential because, as we see, the technology changes relatively fast, and so it's important that when there is a need for some adaptation of any sort, we have access to technical expertise immediately. And the Artificial Intelligence Act itself contains already provisions in terms of monitoring, so we would be monitoring what happened. We were already working, for example, also with the OECD and also the United States and NIST in setting up a sort of database for incidents so that we can continuously be informed of other kinds of incidents that may happen in other parts of the world, and then see whether they meet the levels, the test requirements that we have for being then classified high risk. We can update this list through delegated acts. So we have also included a provision in the Artificial Intelligence Act that allows us to, let's say, modify at least the list of use cases without having to review the legislation, without having to wait to review the
That's very commendable.
And that's very commendable because, as you say from the very beginning, the technology can change fast. And of course, you brought the example of ChatGPT and GPT-4.
Yeah.
So I think the Artificial Intelligence Act can cater for these large models. The Council calls them general-purpose artificial intelligence models. I heard the Parliament rather calls them foundational models.
Foundation model is very funny. It's only Yale using that term.
No, Stanford. I think
Stanford.
the definition
Okay,
of
only
Stanford
one university. Most universities don't call it that.
But if you ask ChatGPT if it is a foundation model, ChatGPT will tell you that they're not. That GPT-4 is a foundation model, and they are an application of that foundation model.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Just try to ask them. And
did you? Okay. I always try to ask stuff about regulation. But okay, so let's get to the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
How is the AI Act, in your opinion, equipped to deal with that?
So what the Council, so I'm talking about the text of the general approach of the Council. What the Council has introduced is a definition for these general-purpose artificial intelligence models. But they have also introduced a way to look at these models, actually I would say systems rather than models. So on the one hand, they look at these systems as capable of carrying out many different tasks, meaning that they can carry out high-risk activities as well. But while the Artificial Intelligence Act is really normally addressing artificial intelligence systems with a specific intent, now we have systems that can carry out many different tasks. And so for those who program it, for the developers, it will be difficult to know whether they will be used for a high-risk task or not. So this is the main difference between these models and the core of the Artificial Intelligence Act as it was designed at the very beginning. Therefore, the Council asked for an adaptation of the requirements of the Artificial Intelligence Act.
Which the Commission is supposed to draft up at some point, right?
Well, what they require is that this is going to be done in an implementing act.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is, from reading what I read in the media, because we have not received the official position of the Parliament yet. As you said, it's also discussed even today, I think.
Yeah.
the Parliament would probably prefer to specify more information already in the Act rather than referring it to a later stage. But then there is another angle to which you have to look at these models or systems, which is the fact that they are part of a supply chain. So there are developers who use these models to develop artificial intelligence systems with specific intents. Okay?
Right.
So in this case, what the Council is asking is that we regulate the cooperation, the collaboration between the two parties. This is something that the Commission, us in our original proposal, we sort of left to the market. And then the Council said, no, because you take a small, medium enterprise that wants to develop a system on the basis of a general system designed by a large corporation. The bargaining power is such that maybe it's better to regulate this collaboration. And so, but also there, they want the details to be reflected in an implementing act. But I think it's important to keep these two angles in mind, because I think that the Parliament will work around those two. And can I just raise a third one, which is for everybody to keep in mind. This is in the Commission proposal. The Council has not touched it, which is the transparency requirements, which is Article 52, which says that a chatbot has to flag to the user that the user is interacting with the machine, not with a human, or that deep fakes have to be labeled if they're not obviously understood.
Fantastic.
So this is also important for this kind of
transparency is linchpin of this kind of stuff, and you keep the whole thing in mind, because I'm going to ask you what to make of it. But let's go to Carme in Madrid. Of course, we all assume that the AI Act will be finalized under the Spanish presidency. So I was wondering whether, in light of what has changed in the AI industry, we've been talking about, of course, general purpose AI, ChatGPT, and all those things emerged or took off a bit after the Council have finalized its position. So as all these new kinds of AI, have they changed in any way the way you approach the file? Are you going to be more stricter? Are you going to be more energetically on general purpose AI? Has your position on general purpose AI, and specifically generative AI, changed at all in light of those developments?
So I think that the discussion, as Scott put it, it was very exciting at this point of time. And even though Commission and Council already has put the positions, I think we're still on time in the trilogues to fine-tune these aspects, and we will see what is the state of maturity of this file when the presidency comes. But of course, we're very energetic to finish it during our presidency. But bear in mind that in parallel that we will push for the legislation, we are already running the AI sandbox. And the sandbox is a very interesting exercise to future-proof the technology and solve many of the issues that you were discussing, both Lucilla and Scott. First of all, we are approaching legislators' view to practitioners' view. What is a bias? What is a high-risk application? How are we going to do that in an iterative way so we adapt to the future changes? Are we going to consider generative AI such as a high-risk application, or do we need a separate classification? All these questions can be also solved at the light of the results, the preliminary results that we will share during our presidency, expecting in October, November. And I think that's a very interesting exercise in both senses. First of all, to really understand how are we going to apply the law in a practical and technical way, because if we do not do so, if we don't define best practices, guidelines, and also implementation tools, that will be very, very difficult to adapt, not for big players, but especially on SMBs. And as Lucilla mentioned it just immediately, many SMBs will either buy a black box or use these generative AI models provided by big techs to develop additional applications on top of that. And we need to also help them adapt to the legislation as soon as possible. I think that the generative AI poses the question as how deep we need to go to ensure that the high-risk application is classified as such. It's like trying to evaluate if a building is sustainable without taking into account if the bricks have carcinogenic agents. So really, probably we need to get in depth that. We can do it, we can test it during the sandbox to really provide with additional knowledge to the decision makers. And I think that's going to be a very interesting exercise.
How's the work on the sandbox sandbox going in Spain? Of course, I know you're working on it. How advanced is it at this stage? Can I come and visit it? I really want to fly to Spain at some point. I did my Erasmus
Of course,
there.
you're invited. I can find any excuse to invite you, so don't worry about that.
Thank you.
So, of course, it's a very interesting exercise that we have like two tracks. One track is a theoretical one that has already started, is understanding the legislation and start writing guidelines. We're doing that. That's a very interesting exercise with the GRC, General Research Center the Commission has in Seville, that has recently been appointed at the Center for Algorithm Transparency.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting point here is not looking at the AI regulation as just one regulation. I mean, the European Union is building a legal framework that altogether the GDPR, Data Act, DSA, DMA, and AI Act are creating really the framework we need to regulate the potential risk of those technologies in different verticals, in different aspects, from economy to cyber rights. And so the part of the guidelines and best practices is already on the go. We're just finishing the legal royal decree law that we need to launch the sandbox and invite the companies. Companies, big and small, have already showed their interest in participating hands-on on sharing their apps for our testing. And I think that's going to be very, very, very interesting. And as you know, that in parallel, we're going to be the first country launching a national agency of supervision of AI. Yeah. So we are already now in the process of creating the agency. And the outcome of the sandbox will not only be the guidelines, will not only be the best practices, we pretend also to develop tools, supervision tools that will be also useful for these national bodies that will have to take care of the supervision, because that's going to be a huge amount of supervision at scale. And as Lucilla said, if you have this coordinating body, so if I discover a high risk application in Italy, I need to know it as soon as possible in Spain. It's like an emergency alert systems that you could have with a pandemic, or you have with the risk of poisoned food or a risk of cybersecurity. So I think that we need to understand that this can be a huge amount of work, and we need to have also tools that allow us to scale up the task we're going to have to.
I just want to pick on one thing you said very quickly. Do you envision any kind of synergy between ECAT, the European Center for Algorithm Transparency, and all you're doing regarding the sandbox and possibly the Artificial Intelligence Supervisory Authority? Do you see those things that possibly work in concert, and how, if so?
We see a lot of synergies between DSA and AI from the supervision point of view. At the point that we are proposing now, and we like tuning this to the Commission, in the future National Agency of Supervision of AI in Spain will also the appointed body to supervise DSA. We see two different worlds here: DMA coordinating the market and the competition, and DSA more in the hands of the citizens. And as you know, in Spain, we're promoting the Charter of Digital Rights. Yeah. And I think that we should keep like two different visions that can complement and be controversial sometimes to really get out of the best of those worlds. And so we see a lot of synergies between DSA and AI Act in terms of the supervision of world, the type of people you need to have in place, data scientists, collaboration with scientific experts and industry. And our approach would be to have the supervision body of both regulations. But we are still now discussing it with the Commission and even internally in Spain. So it's not an official position, and just sharing with you the brainstorming process we are in.
I thought I had broken news, but sadly I hadn't.
No, don't try to scoop it. It's like it's a work in progress, but that's the initial approach, yes.
Just poor reporters about to be put out of a job by ChatGPT come as a, bear with us.
But let me point out, Scott, one thing. Let me just to finish. I think the important lesson here is that, like, when Europe started all this process, we felt really alone. Europe was alone.
Europe was alone.
Yeah, Europe were alone. The world we were already thinking about the Euro AI regulation. Europe was seen like the third way. I mean, just many other countries were seeing Europe either the super regulator power that's going to hamper innovation, or they're looking at that with a little bit high level. Okay, yes, you regulate, we will innovate, and we really advance faster than you. And I think now what we can really say very proudly is that we are no longer the third way. We are the only way.
Wow, bold. Well, good. Angia, it's a tough act to follow, but I wanted to ask actually something. Actually, I want to take a little step back and like just a little bit on the general purpose AI question I asked Lucilla. Which do you think is the best approach? Is it the kick the can down the road approach adopted by Council, or is it the Parliament approach of including provisions about it already in the Act?
So I think we agree on many things, but I do think the parliamentary approach is the best way forward. This is a technology that's impacting the tech sector now. We need to have a conversation now about how best to address this technology. We need to send clear signals to the tech industry of how this technology should be regulated and governed. And it is a way in which we can do that sort of approach to regulation much more transparently and with much more input, particularly given how quickly this technology is moving, how quickly it's changing. Some of the things that I think, just to pull out areas of agreement, I think we do agree we need monitoring. Monitoring is essential. It's a way for government to be flexible, to identify where changes are occurring. I think some places where perhaps we want to see a bit more is around more of an obligation for upstream providers of these very powerful systems to implement some kind of know your customer framework, to identify who they are selling these services to, and to consider customers who perhaps should not be offered the service. Independent auditing is another area. This is essential for any kind of meaningful assessments of the impacts and risks and ways to mitigate those risks for these kinds of models. And the third thing I think we must see in this space is more of a awareness of how these systems are being released. There's a very big difference between a chat GPT, where you're hosting it and making it available to anybody to use, including my own mother and father, who this is their first introduction to AI. And it's very different. It makes it much more wide scale. It makes the impacts and foreseeing those impacts and mitigating those impacts much more difficult. It has upended education systems. It has upended the creative industry. That is a problem. And I think that is a kind of way in which this technology is being released that regulators should assess and look at. There are other ways of releasing these systems that need to be factored into the law. So in our opinion, that is the place that Parliament should be focusing. And the trilogues really focus attention on the ways in which systems are being released, how they're being tested, who's testing them, who's auditing them, and who they're being sold to.
Should there be a ChatGPT Act?
No. Oh, no. I don't think. It's a good question. My only hesitancy there is to create an entirely separate act for an individual technology it requires so much political will, so much motivation, so much time. Whereas I think what we're seeing is a very it's a next generation of a technology that will have the same broad types of risks and impacts as the current Act is set up to address. So for us, we very much see this as being something as part of the Act. I think that it's a good question to ask of whether this requires a sort of separate component of the Act that's defining these in a slightly different way with the different additional checks, or as something that has a lot of the high-risk elements, but perhaps some apply to different actors in the space. And I just really want to call out something you said earlier, which is a very good point. This is not like a narrow system or a very simple supply chain where you have a single actor creating a system, giving it to their consumers. The supply chains for this are incredibly complex. Where people are sourcing their data from, how that data is curated and cleaned, what aspects of these models are pulling from open source, what aspects of these models are pulling from the work or research of other organizations. Addressing challenges or issues that arise in these systems is going to be an enormous challenge that the trilogues will need to address. But it is something where, nonetheless, it has to be addressed. We need to define clear accountability and responsibility for the supply chains of these systems urgently. Failing to do so, I fear, is going to continue the types of issues we've seen with ChatGPT and some of these other models, where bias or misinformation or other kinds of challenges can just pop up quite drastically.
Just a very quick follow-up, not on that, on something totally different. Of course, I suppose you are a keen observer of worldwide AI regulation. And we've been hearing, of course, that the AI Act in a way has been blazing a trail in terms of setting the kind of terms of the discussion. What have you seen in other countries, maybe in the US, where there was an AI blueprint released last year, which you liked and maybe should be taken on board?
Yeah, it's a very different approach. The U.S. government's sort of AI Bill of Rights and proposed AI Accountability Act is very much a rights-based approach to regulation. That is very rooted in American principles around rights-based approaches. It's something that works well for that environment. It does rely on modes of redress that are, in my opinion, not the best suited for AI systems, where it relies on going to courts, on sort of lawsuits, on litigation, kind of setting the tone for addressing some of these issues. And it's a very American thing. We love to sue each other, but it's not perhaps the best way to deal with systems that operate at this scale, at this pace, and can impact people in this drastic, serious, across mass societal way. I do think China is an interesting example to talk about. Very quickly.
Wow. Going there.
So it's interesting. I mean, many of the things that have come out about the Chinese regulation in these last few days, I think, are fascinating to look at the similarities between what the EU is proposing. I mean, you spoke earlier about the transparency requirements for generative AI. That is very much a part of the Chinese bill. Any generative content has to be identified as such. There are restrictions on copyright and IP, although it's a bit circular in how they're construing it. It sort of suggests that any data that violates copyright cannot be in the training data sets for these kinds of models, but then what violates copyright. But again, they are grappling with very similar challenges to what we are grappling with here, what we're grappling with in the US, we're grappling in the UK. And the last thing I'll say is just on the UK, we are taking the UK is taking a principles-based approach to regulation from their white paper that's just been released. Again, it's going to be a very long time before we even see a bill, but that approach does not provide any statutory powers or new powers for regulators or for government agencies. What it does provide, though, is a central government office whose job is meant to provide some kind of cross-sectoral, cross-regulatory joining up of how to address AI systems, how to think about the risks that they address, and how to monitor for those kinds of risks. So there are similarities here, and there are really fantastic ideas that are filtering up through these international approaches that I think showcase how much of an impact the EU AI Act has had on shaping those discussions. It's, again, really exciting to see that there are some commonalities here.
Thank you, Andrew. Lucilla, I actually wanted to ask you something about regarding China, because I know that Austria sent a letter to the European Commission entreating the Commission to bring up the problem of Chinese AI during the trialogues, and possibly even enforcing a ban against Chinese-made artificial intelligence applications. Are we likely to see any geopolitical issue pop up in trialogues? Do you expect that letter to be taken seriously?
Well, to be frank with you, the position of the European Commission has always been to create a level playing field also from the international point of view. So this is a regulation that is based on the internal market, harmonized internal market. So it introduces rules, which means that if you put an artificial intelligence systems on the market or in use in the European Union, you have to follow certain rules if the system is high risk and all the rest. So whether you're European, whether you're American, whether you're Chinese, you have to follow the rules. In this sense, we create a level playing field. So I really do not think that the Commission is now planning to move away from this and banning Chinese application, unless applications, whether Chinese or from any other part of the world, they really present a serious threat to our society, but that's a different story.
I think the main concern in the letter was that Chinese application AI is from now on supposed to be developed according to socialist values, and that seemed to be a big point of contention in Austria.
They have rules. You heard the rules, but if I'm not wrong, these rules tend to be applied not at the government level, not for the government applications, but more for the private applications.
Right.
So I think that in China there continues to be a lot of monitoring of people, and certainly their privacy rules, if any, is completely different from ours. So these are the main differences with China. But you know, we have a policy in Europe about de-risking in our relations with China. It's not so much about decoupling or, you know, banning the entry of their applications or their products into our market.
How you survive without TikTok?
Well, TikTok, I leave it to my friends of the DSA. No.
But yeah, of course, but you don't have it on your phone anymore, right?
I don't have it, but to be frank with you, I'm too old to ever have had a TikTok on my phone.
Sad. Just very quickly, trialogues. How optimistic and how chirpy are you about it? Are you very looking forward to it? How quickly do you think you can close it?
I look forward to it. I've just come out of the trilogues on the CHIPS Act.
Yeah, I know.
Which were fun and very interesting. It's very, very interesting how there are different positions, and the role of the Commission is to act as an honest broker. So we really have to find a compromise in between the different parties. And I say that in AI, in many cases, you see that the positions of the Council and the Parliament are not so different. And so I'm pretty optimistic that we can find a good solution. I think we will need a certain number of these political trilogues. I hope they can happen under the Spanish presidency, because we all have the ambition of finalizing before the end of the year. If that is not the case, we will close under the Belgian presidency. But, we like to stick to the ambition.
What do you think will be, very quick telegraphic answer, please.
Yeah.
What do you think will be the main sticking point there, the main point of attrition?
Biometrics.
Biometrics.
Yes.
RBI.
Approach to biometrics.
Right.
Yes.
I was told I was looking in the wrong direction. Secretary Artigas, I know that, of course, Spain is very keen on closing the AI Act as quickly as possible, or anyway, during its presidency. Is there any red line that you won't trespass during trialogues, even if those were to prevent an agreement with Parliament? So what are you going not to budge on? What is going to be your kind of, non-negotiable issue, such as, of course, biometrics? Is this something you can live with a ban of real-life biometric identification, RBI, remote biometric identification in real time? Is this something you can live with or not?
I think, we'll see how mature these positions are when we take on the presidency. Right. I agree with Ursula that that's probably the hot issue, that we have already seen. We have a position just more close to the Commission, in the sense that we don't see that it's in line with the European principles and values to have overall real-time biometrics and face identity in open spaces by governmental bodies. I think the point here is in which exceptions we accept, either enforced by law, by whatever jurisdiction or whatever counter-terrorism case, or there are other more administrative legislations that can be applied to that. I think that's an interesting point to discuss. But, and I would say that comes to in the next connection, that we're trying to put a regulation in place, which is the AI Act, of course, that will send a benchmark, as it was the GDPR. But do not forget that we are not only putting in place a legislation or a technical threshold, we are putting in place a moral threshold for the rest of the world. Even if something is going to be technically possible or even legal, probably citizens, probably consumers says, okay, this is legal in my country, but I do not accept you to do that with my data, or I don't accept you to do that with the algorithms that are trying to microsegment me or manipulate me. And I think that's very important, because we cannot see the law in independent way at the Declaration of Principles and Rights of the European Union that was inspired by our Charter of Digital Rights. And I think the discussion more goes about what's going on in terms of how do we regulate the future of technology in an ethical and rights-oriented way. Because now we're talking about AI, but put also in place newer technologies or synthetic biology. I mean, we're going to face all these future issues in the ongoing future. And I think the AI Act is really the benchmark, the reference that can be set in order to put the limits of the technology development, because we believe in technological process as long as it is in favor of people and putting people in the center.
And how do you reconcile that with the fact that Spain, of course, wants to be an AI powerhouse? Don't you think that moral stance will in some way hold back AI development in Spain and Europe? No.
Not at all. Not at all.
Why not?
I think first of all,
I have to play devil's advocate.
No, yeah, because forget it. I'm a person that comes from business, and I would say, please read the sign of the times. Do not do the efforts in lobbying against a law that's going to be against the social progress and the benefit for people, and the benefit for all. We are all realizing that technology without borders, so it creates some harm, potential harm that cannot be reverted back. I mean, I always say that we are in a generation of transition that need to solve two very important existential problems for the humanity and for the next generation. One is climate change. If we do not solve it, thanks to technology, there is no possibility to revert back the harm we have already done. And the same happens with the ethical development of technology. If we do not solve it now, thinking about the future, also technology developments, we will not be able to revert back the harm we are creating. And I think that's something that the industry itself has realized. But then we need to understand that we need a new deal. We need to deal with the citizens, and we need to deal with the consumers, because we are too much used of witnessing how software industry is pulling out products in the market without testing them, without controls, and asking us to solve the problems they have already created. We assume that every time we reboot the system, the operating system in our PC. But now we have realized with the ChatGPT, probably there are some issues that the industry should have filtered before launching the project to the market. I think ChatGPT is a beta without telling it is a beta. We cannot go just with research to commercialization without warning the users. And imagine this could have, it's like launching a car without airbags, without brakes. And I think that's something that needs to be revisited. At what extent we need to put some controls before some AI product is in place. But that will be another discussion probably in the hands of the consumers and IP rights. I really believe that innovation cannot be taken at the expense of cyber rights or personal rights.
Just one word answer. ChatGPT Act, yes or no?
Not necessary.
Not necessary. Okay, sad. Andrew, I think we have 2 minutes before the Q&A starts, so I want you to be our chaperone. And I want to actually understand your take on what I just asked Secretary Artigas. How do we reconcile in Europe regulating AI and having a strong set of protections with being trying at least to catch up with the Asian and American giants when it comes to AI development?
Well, I think Carmen is exactly right. I mean, it is about setting very clear thresholds and expectations around what safe and ethical AI looks like, and executing that, operationalizing that. Part of what I think this regulation is doing is addressing what I would describe as a culture issue in the tech industry that we have had for the last 25 years. A culture of move fast, break things, a culture of quickly rushing products to market without clear safety checks, without meaningful engagement with members of the public, driven by profit motive. And that's profit motive is not something that I think we should be afraid of. I think it's an expectation for any company to try to push products to market. And within any company, you have teams that have very different incentives. We have product teams that want to rush to market. We have researchers who want to rush to research. And we have this group of actors that are roughly called responsible AI teams or ethical AI teams. I used to be on one whose job is to try to slow things down, to think about regulation, to think about ethics, and to think about moral values. Right now, we are in an environment where responsible AI teams are not empowered. They have no power inside of these discussions when it comes up against profit motive. It's what happened with ChatGPT. We saw excellent reporting done about how these systems have been launched over the objections of ethics teams within these organizations. Regulation provides that ability, that requirement for these teams to think very carefully and to consider the societal implications, even in the face of very complex, intense competition dynamics. So that is, I think, something that must be made clear. I don't think that's bad for business. I think that's good for business. What engenders trust. We do lots of public attitude surveys. We do lots of engagement with members of the public at ADA. The thing we hear time and time again that people in the public want is strong, independent regulation that makes them feel safe, that makes them feel like these products are working in their interests. That is what they expect from companies. That is particularly what young people expect from companies, surprisingly, from our survey findings. And that's what I think this act can help us deliver. So I think it's excellent to see that this is the direction that we're going. I think it's
okay. You like it? I get it. When is the singularity coming? Deadline.
Not anytime soon. Yeah, in my opinion, I can't say with great confidence. This might be more of a question for the existential risk folks.
I think we have 10 minutes for questions, if I'm right. So, who wants to start? The gentleman at the front. Please, questions and no comments like, I want to say this. I know you're not going to say
change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.